Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre-Production Podcast. Thank you so much for listening for yet another episode. I am very honored to sit here today with Prano Bailey-Bond, the writer-director of Censor, excellent horror film debut that I really liked and you should see if you haven't seen it yet. And I'm really excited to talk to her about her journey. So to get started, I would love to know where your spark for your love of film began. Where did that start for you?
Well, thanks for having me on and for your love for Censor. So I grew up in kind of the middle of nowhere, really. I grew up in Wales, which is a little country off the side of England, for anybody who doesn't know. And it was like a really rural community, quite a strange mix of like local Welsh people and a lot of English hippies who moved there. So I was part of like the English hippie community, even though I was born in Wales. It was a very creative community, but also this is like pre-internet, so it was kind of boring at times as well. So the TV and the video shelf were my friend. I was lucky enough to have parents who were they had really good taste in films, and that video shelf kind of became my portal in a way to cinema, even though I was watching it on like a tiny 80s, 90s TV screen in like this kind of windy, rainy country where you're recording something off the telly and like the aerial goes down and it goes all fuzzy.
That actually sounds great. That sounds fantastic. It sounds very atmospheric. You're setting the mood very well.
Totally. I mean, yeah, there were some things that I used to watch when, you know, your parents are out and you're home alone and a car goes past, you know, in the middle of the night and there's weird shadows that happen all over the walls and suddenly your kind of imagination sparks. And I guess a lot of my love of horror probably came from those experiences. But that shelf was like a real kind of portal into cinema for me. And a lot of what was on there were things like Eraserhead was there, the Marx Brothers, The Life of Brian. So it was a real mix of kind of weird, dark, absurd films. I remember, you know, John Carpenter films being on there. And like I said, really good taste from my parents.
That's very impressive. I'm used to hearing about Cinderella and, you know, all those movies. But that's awesome. Eraserhead.
Yeah. And I was like really into drawing, and my dad was an artist and a photographer. My mum had been an actress. Before she had kids, she studied at RADA. So when we were watching TV, for example, like that was another weird portal into the kind of filmmaking world, because my mum would be like, oh, I went to school with that actress, or, oh, I was in a play with that actor. And even though we were like stranded in the middle of nowhere, there was this reality behind the people that I was watching on screen, that like these were real people and they were sort of one person removed from me, even if it was, you know, a few decades ago. That was very interesting, you know, getting that insight. I was obsessed with story. I loved to draw and I loved performance. And I kind of thought, well, maybe I want to be an actor. So I went and studied after I left school. This was kind of college years. So you're sort of 16, 17. I went and studied performing arts. And at the time I thought, yeah, I want to act. And it was through basically acting, sometimes seeing myself act, which was enough to put me off, but mainly through getting the chance to direct for the first time. I basically got the opportunity to direct a play, and I chose a play called The Chairs by Ionesco, which is like an absurdist, surreal play. I was like, wow, this kind of brings together all the things that I love. This brings together the imagery and the painting and the visual stuff that I love. And it brings together the story aspect and then the performance side of things and imagination. And it's that thing with what I was searching for when I was painting and when I was kind of creating art was always like meaning, like translating some idea I had to other people, but in a kind of creative way. And I saw all of that coming together by being on the outside of a performance, by being able to shape something. And obviously I was studying theatre, and I found theatre incredibly frustrating because you couldn't say, like, look at the telephone, I mean, you can use light, obviously, in theatre, but I wanted to be able to do a close-up. I wanted to be in a real location. And I did try to bring a real location to the stage one time where I brought real trees onto the stage and built a forest with a friend's dad who used to hire out Christmas trees. So when he wasn't using them, I was like, can we build a forest on stage? But a lot of the time I was kind of taking the scenes we were doing and filming them on like my mum's DV camera in a real space, because I felt more truth in that space. I felt like we could kind of expand it, and find the story in a different way. So that was all the kind of building blocks for me to realize that I wanted to be a director and I wanted to be working in film. I was really kind of obsessed, I suppose, or fascinated and inspired by all the different layers of filmmaking. The sound design, the edit, the imagery, like every single layer of filmmaking interested me. It felt like another way for you to add meaning to what you were doing. While I was studying performing arts, I went and did a night course in editing, and it was like linear VHS editing because it was quite a while ago. And so I made this like weird kind of, I suppose, like art house, absurd sort of piece that was very experimental and probably didn't make that much sense. I decided I wanted to try and learn how to edit on like software. I actually learned how to edit on Premiere through a dance piece of coursework because I hated dance. And I was like, I had to choreograph something. So I thought, well, how the hell do I choreograph something? So I took all the pieces of movement from films that I loved, which included Carlito's Way, Reservoir Dogs, like a bunch of random films. And I cut it all together. American Beauty was in there as well. Cut it all together. And that was how I learned to edit. And I based my choreography off the movement in those clips. And I failed in my dance piece. I think my dance teacher thought I wasn't taking it seriously, and maybe I wasn't, but I learned how to edit. And yeah, I kind of fell in love with every aspect of it through learning those kind of small skills.
It's interesting to see that like parts of your journey of learning how the craft works came from doing things that maybe you didn't necessarily, wasn't your number one choice. Maybe theater wasn't your number one choice, and you were realizing that you love real locations, you love being on set or on a real space, but you're doing it and through theater and you're learning in that way. Maybe, acting initially, but that kind of taught you, I think I'd rather like to be behind the camera. And then of course, you don't want to do dance choreography, but you use that as a way to learn more about editing. So it's kind of cool because like a lot of people are always sort of wondering how they get to do the thing, whatever that thing is. And sometimes you do have to do something else and sort of like realize, and maybe this isn't quite where I'm at. And then that sort of leads you into what you really want to do.
Yeah, totally. I think I've always thought of myself as an opportunistic filmmaker. And that ran through my short films when I started making short films as well, because I made a short film while I was studying in my college years, which was how I got into university eventually to study filmmaking. I basically wrote, directed, edited, I did everything. I shot it. I had never had any training in how to make a film, and I'd written this kind of gangster noir short film called Sinister Shadows. Again, not sure how great a film it was, but anyway.
The title's great, I will say.
Thanks.
The title's awesome.
No one's come after me for the rights, but maybe one day, maybe after this podcast. But I'd kind of trained in a way through just watching films. Like I just watched the same films over and over and over again. I watched TV, and I think through doing that, you learn how a scene is put together. You start to think about what the camera's doing and where the camera is and how it's cutting. And so some of that became instinctive to me. When I sort of made this short film, I was like, yeah, I know how I want the camera to sort of glide in, like this. Obviously, I didn't have the equipment to be able to actually do that brilliantly. I just had a handheld DV camera and my mum's headlights on her car to light my exterior scenes.
Which is all the tools you need to make a great film.
Exactly. But with that film, I then went and studied at university. And after coming out of uni, you've got your films that you want to make. You've got your shorts in your head. And a lot of those shorts were quite weird. They were horror skewed. And at the time in the UK, it didn't feel as though the funders, the financiers were looking for that kind of thing. The trend was much more like social realist drama. So I'd apply for funding, which is probably different to how it works in the States. But over here, you have these kind of little pots of money that you can go to the BFI or Film London or all these different financiers and apply for that money, and either you're successful or you're not. And a lot of the time I'd go with my weird, absurd horror film and not be successful. And so I had to always be finding other ways to get my films made. Sometimes that was about how do I do it myself anyway without that money? Like, how can I be resourceful? How can I do this the cheapest way possible? And other times it was about grabbing opportunities that came my way. So, a production company who'd come to me and say, we want to make a short film about X. And I'm like, okay, how can I make that be exciting for me? How can I show who I am as a filmmaker and still tick the box of what they want out of this? There was a lot of that throughout my short film, filmmaking life, that I was kind of opportunistic or having to duck and dodge and find my way around obstacles, basically.
This is something I'm very interested in because I know, nothing about that sort of like the financing side of filmmaking outside of the States. And I've heard a few people talk about it when I interviewed David F. Sandberg he's Swedish, and he talked a little bit about that and trying to find ways to find financing, making short films and movies over there. Could it be equivalent to like if you're looking for a grant? Do you essentially pitch them your idea and they hold all the cards, they can say yes or no?
Yeah, basically. So, when I was making shorts, for example, you'd often get a film fund that opened that would say, okay, we have 10 to 15,000 pounds for 10 short films each. And you kind of have to submit your script, your director's statement, your crew, etc., your budget. They go through all of that and you might get shortlisted or not. They eventually pick 10 films and they'll make them. And that felt like the way to get into the industry in so many ways, because you're seeing other filmmakers do that and then get to go on and make their feature films. So you're kind of looking at that pot of gold thinking that's the step, that's the way in, because those people can then help me go to the next level in my career. But there's things those funds are looking for, or there were things I felt they were looking for when I was making my shorts, and I didn't really fit that mold. I think now it would be different because I think the attitude to horror has changed or is changing. I think now that people can see, like financiers can see, that there's a market and an audience for horror, and that it's saying something social and saying something about our social fears. And you've got these amazing examples like Get Out and The Babadook and all these brilliant films that have kind of shifted the landscape of horror and how it's seen. I think now probably those financiers are much more open to genre films. But at the time I felt like, well, do I need to be making social realist films? So at one point I thought, okay, maybe I need to go into one of these funds with a social realist short film. And I teamed up with somebody who'd worked on the streets, and we wrote a short film that was around her first time working on the streets, and we went in with that. And we got down to the last kind of 10, 12, and they were picking something like 8, and we didn't get through. And I was like, oh my God, even when I come in with a social realist, like something that's kind of, grounded and gritty, and in that sense, I still don't get through, and it was gutting. Actually, my friend did go on to make her film. The writer, the former sex worker, did actually go on to make her film, which is brilliant. But then the film fund had actually seen my showreel, and they phoned me up and said, we can see you're a horror director and we have this horror script that's been funded, but we don't have a director for it. And would you be interested? And that was actually the first time I ever thought of myself as a horror director. I'd never thought that before. And it was like, oh, okay, so these people are coming to me because they think I make a certain type of film. And I can see why they think that, because I do. I'm obsessed with like the sweltering dark side of repression and like what it can do to somebody. And that was there in so many of my films. And I think horror is the return of the repressed. And I was always super into horror, and my ideas have always been really dark and weird. But I'd never put myself in a box. I don't think anyone, when I was studying, was really talking about genre like that. I never really thought about it. I did direct that film with the writer, and it did okay. And that was kind of my first short film on the festival circuit that allowed me to get out and meet other people. I thought, well, okay, I'm going to call myself a horror director because there's no harm if it's bringing people to me, and actually it does align with what I'm doing.
And isn't it interesting how in the profession that is filmmaking, you rarely ever consider yourself something until someone else says, hey, you're really good at that. And then you're like, oh, wait, really? Because like when I made my film, I wasn't like, I didn't like wake up the next day and go, oh, I'm a filmmaker. And then other people suddenly were asking me what it was like making my first film. Other people were coming up to me and asking me for advice on getting a film off the ground. And suddenly then I felt like, oh shit, this is happening. This is real. In your case, you clearly had a love of horror. Your parents had Eraserhead on the wall, and that's a weird, scary, fucked up movie. I remember the first time I saw that. I felt like I was in some kind of a drug trance or something. It was crazy. But now you have someone who comes up to you and says, hey, I know you were trying to do this thing, but I actually think maybe you'd be really good at this.
Yeah.
And it's just exciting to hear how people kind of, you get those little moments that unlock something and you realize, oh yeah, you know what? That is actually where I'm at.
Yeah, totally. And it was also kind of, you're saying, I think I'm this person. And then it feels like the industry is saying, well, we don't want that person. And then you go, okay, well, maybe I need to be this kind of filmmaker instead. And then you try that and somebody comes to you and goes, oh no, what you were before, what you were trying to be originally fits, it matches. And suddenly you're like, okay. I always think of like, you're just trying to open that door a crack to get through, and then there's another door and probably even more people trying to get through that door. So
sometimes you have a goal in mind, you have some kind of goalpost, and you're like, if I can just get to that thing, and like you talked about being funded by these people, if I can just get to that thing, it seems like other people get something made after that. And then some people get very excited. Okay, I got the thing. Great, I did it. And then they kind of rest and they're like complacent. And that's never good. I've heard other filmmakers talk about how every time they achieve something, like you just said, it's like, what's the next thing? All right, I just peeked through the door. How can I continue to push it open? So did you feel a sense of satisfaction when you would achieve some of these things? Or was it sort of like, all right, I did that. Now let's keep going?
I think you're always moving the goalposts. I know I am, and it's something I'm conscious of. So you have to celebrate your wins. You have to stop and go, oh, I've achieved this. Let's enjoy that for a moment. And then go, okay, what's next? But it is, it's a cycle, isn't it? And in so many ways, that's partly what always attracted me to filmmaking, because that I love working on projects. I love burrowing into ideas or subjects or people's lives, characters' lives. And that when you get to the end of that, that's finished, and you'll go on to some other exciting topic that fascinates your brain. And there's never a boring moment, it keeps your brain alive. And so in a way, I'm probably seeking that a little bit. But yeah, I do think I think it is a slight danger in this kind of industry that you can be constantly going for that dangling golden carrot.
I kind of think of it as a ladder that never ends. And every step you take up, you're like, all right, I'm closer to the thing. And then you look up and suddenly the ladder extended. And fuck. Okay. And I think it's all psychological. I mean, because it is for me, for sure. It's this torturing psychological pit of despair.
I think there's been moments for me where I've always gone like, imagine if my 12-year-old self saw me now, or my 14-year-old self saw me now. There was a music video I made, which was one of my first music videos. And actually it was an example of going like, right, I'm just going to do this on no money. What resources do I have? Essentially, I wanted to get repped as a music video director. And that was like the way I could see doing it. I wanted to do something that had a slightly more commercial edge to it, something a bit more fashiony. I mean, it was about dead dolls waking up in a creepy house. So this is like fashiony and commercial in my world. But basically, I was like, how do I make this happen with the resources that I have available to me? And I found this abandoned house that was like behind where I was living, that my landlord had got keys to. And I was like, this is incredible. I borrowed some lights, borrowed a camera. I kind of pulled a crew together and we made the whole thing on £160. edited it myself, and I was super happy with it. And it went to a bunch of festivals, won some awards. And then it got picked to play at the Prince Charles Cinema, which is this amazing indie cinema in London, ahead of The Neverending Story, which as a kid, I mean, who didn't love The Neverending Story? This was a few years ago, but it was just such an amazing, lovely moment where I just thought, imagine back when I was 10 or 8 or whenever I loved that film, and thinking one day my work's going to play with that film. And it was like a lovely,
That's
scratchy
so cool.
film copy, like of The Neverending Story. And I did,
great.
yeah, I did get repped off that music video as well. That was a good one. And it was like hardly any money, again, like opportunistic stuff, looking around and seeing, who do I know who's talented? You know, you see some dancers at an event and you're like, let me take your number because they might be useful at some point. I had a friend who was studying at London College of Fashion. She'd never done anything like that before, but she made the costumes on like 40 quid. She bought all the fabric and made, you know, and that was her first piece of work as a stylist. So she went on to work in music videos and fashion and all that kind of thing. And it's like, you know, being really resourceful, looking around and saying, what have I got? Even if I've got hardly any money, even if nobody's actually supporting me financially to make this stuff, I can see other people around me who have the same dream. My director of photography, who I've worked with from, you know, we met in uni and we worked all the way through most of my films and music videos. She shot Censor, and we kind of aligned in that and were able to support each other. And I think that's really important. It's like finding your people and being able to see who is going to be a good collaborator, creative person, and help you create what you want to bring to life, really.
Because you're going to make a movie or you're going to make a short, and there's going to be a lot of people that help you do that. There's going to be folks who you're like, you know, I appreciate what you've done for me on this, but probably don't want to ever work with you again. But then there's going to be other people. There's going to be other people who stand out, like your DP, and you're like, you feel this connection, and you know, okay, this person's got my back. This person understands me. We feel like there's a mind meld thing happening right now, and I definitely need to work with this person again. That happened with me many times. But one of the things you mentioned that I think is really valuable, and I've talked about this a lot in other podcasts and YouTube videos and stuff, but people tend to think that a film they can make is going to fall into their lap, or they're just going to find this opportunity that's just going to manifest itself, and it's going to create this amazing opportunity. And that's just not how it works. The idea that you knew, hey, there's this really cool house here and I can get in there. I have access to lights. Let's just shoot it here. This is the Robert Rodriguez, you know, Kevin Smith school of, if you got it, shoot it. And people need to look around at what's around their house, what's in their neighborhood. Where can they make something cool? Because location is so important. And a lot of people don't think about that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will write a script and they're like, oh, I'm going to set this in a castle or in space. And then you're like, okay, I can't afford to build a spaceship. I can't afford to hire a castle, you know, and then you're stuck. Whereas if you start to look around and go, oh, this is interesting. What kind of story could happen here? Which is how I made a few things. A lot of the early music videos I was doing were in that kind of space. Like I lived next door to a warehouse. I'd actually just made the film I mentioned where I'd been brought on as the director because I was a horror director. We had to shoot that short film in like 3 days. And it was one of my first times working with like a proper crew, and it was such a tight schedule, and I was kind of quite frustrated by the whole process. And I just wanted to create like what I called a playground of filmmaking. I wanted to be able to just find an idea and roll with it, and have an idea and do it, and not have somebody saying, we haven't got time, you've got to drop some shots, we have to move on, which is like,
that's the dream.
That's, yeah. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to design a shoot that means I can do that. So I looked at all the different elements. And one of the things I had was a big warehouse space that was really weird and kind of crumbling down and had all these sort of weird bits of glass and windows and things to look through. And I thought, I'm going to find a a song and I'm going to do something in this space. And then I started to break down, well, what slows you down? What means you have to stick to a schedule? And I thought, well, actors coming in. So I'll play all the characters myself. So I thought I'll just have me. I'm going to have me, my DOP, the same DOP, Annika Summerson, and I'm going to get a makeup artist who transforms me into different characters. And she can sleep in my house next door because we're going to do night shoots. And I kind of wrote this idea based on those things I had available to me. And I made this mental, weird music video. This was pre the Doll's House one, the kind of more commercial one. This was one of my first ones, and I couldn't get representation of it because it was too weird and too glitchy. And it was like, I kind of cut like every few frames, basically. It was like a juddery, weird nightmare where
It sounds great to me.
I play a version of myself. I play 3 different monsters. One of them was like, I based him on the guy from Poltergeist 2 who turns up at the house, with a hat.
Yeah.
So I had this kind of mask on, and it was so much fun. It was amazing. I mean, I was absolutely battered by the end of this shoot, but it was brilliant because we could just have ideas and play around. I mean, there was a lot of planning that obviously went into it, because when you're playing 3 to 5 characters yourself, you need like reverse shots and stuff. And I got a friend to come over for a bit and do like body double over the shoulder, etc., to kind of sell all this stuff. It was amazing. And I made that on £200. I mean, all of those things basically helped me move forward and get representation, but they were also experience for me in terms of filmmaking and figuring out who am I, what's my identity as a filmmaker, what excites me, who are the people I want to work with, and how do I want to work, and experimenting a little bit, which is what I think making short films should be about, because there's like £160 at stake and it's yours, instead of like a few million and it's not yours.
And I also am curious about performing, because you're in this, you're showing your face, you're running around doing all these roles, and you studied performance initially as well. Did that help you inform the way you speak with actors? Did it give you more of a respect for that process?
Yeah, 100%. I think putting yourself in the position of the actor always helps you to understand what you're asking somebody else to do. It's the same with any role, I think. I learned how to edit when I was a teenager, and editing was like my way of earning money in the background of wanting to be a director. And it meant that when I then started to work with editors, I could talk their language. And I think the same for actors. This doesn't mean you have to go out and try and get an acting job. You could just go and do an acting class. And I'll still do that sometimes now. Like before I shot Censor, I thought, my God, I need to do something to sharpen my skills in terms of working with actors. So I thought, well, what else is better than going and putting myself in that position? Because you start to hear direction when you're, for example, in a class, you're hearing direction, you're in the mind of that particular character, solving the problems that you have in that moment. And it just gives you a little bit more empathy. It helps you to understand the vulnerable position that actors are putting themselves in.
There is like a pressure to like get the shot and make sure like what the lighting does on your face, and you understand sort of like the movement of that, which I imagine helped a little bit.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't have massive control over my expressions, and I learned that through doing this music video, where I was like, oh, I was trying to look scared, but I actually just looked confused. So that was an interesting discovery of myself, and you kind of start to appreciate how effortless a good actor makes these things look.
A lot of people, like your general audience members, people who aren't gonna like scour IMDb and read letterbox reviews and stuff, like your general audience members, they don't think about the director and the writer. They're just looking at who the actor is, and if the actor's not doing a good job, it's not working for them.
Yeah.
So for me, like, this is completely different from short, but like being in front of a camera for 13 years on YouTube kind of did make me aware of that, and the audience idea of people watch you, and sort of having that empathy generated for actors through that. But also, yeah, it's really a really good idea to every once in a while put yourself in front of the camera, even if it's not something that you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And you might be awful, and then it will just reassure you that you're on the right side of the camera.
So you got representation off of the next one, right? The one after this, the Dollhouse one.
Yeah, that was representation for music videos. So at that point, I wasn't really looking for an agent for, narrative work or anything. I wasn't looking for an agent for filming, but I knew that if I could make music videos, then I'd be able to work with a budget. I'd be getting like more professional commercial experience. And there's a lot of like music video directors who I love who have moved into feature film, like Jonathan Glazer and Michel Gondry. And I kind of admired those guys and put them on a pedestal. And I thought, well, that's a good route. So I went into directing music videos, and it was a bit of a mixed bag. I think I remember my first music video pitch that I won, and it was a £10,000 budget. And I was like, wow, we can do anything. I mean, if I did that with 160 quid, £10,000, this is going to be amazing. But then obviously you have to pay for everything, all the equipment, you have to pay everybody, you have to pay for the space. And I'd designed this video where we were, again, building a forest in a warehouse. I've got an obsession with forests, clearly.
Totally understand. It's a great place.
Yeah. And luckily I had an amazing production designer who I'd worked with on some of my shorts, and we made it happen. But it was a really fast learning curve about, how that kind of budget isn't anything at all, really. I did work on some videos that I was really proud of and with some amazing artists, but there's a lot of pitching. You're writing ideas constantly, and you'll win 1 in 8 or 10 of those pitches. And all of that time you're writing pitches, you're not writing your feature film. And so I kept putting my feature film to one side. And over time, I realized that that was not what I should be doing. And so I stopped doing music videos to focus on Censor, actually. And that was when we started to get development money. But all the way through that process, I was making short films as well.
I think that everyone who wants to be a filmmaker or pursuing it professionally in any capacity has some sort of internal clock that is ticking constantly, where they are consistently reminded, like, time is running out. Every time that I'm not making a movie or a show or whatever is time wasted. And I've always felt that way. I know. It seems like most people I talk to, they're running. They're just going. I have to make something. I have to write something. And you never stopped. And I'm curious also about one thing. Where did writing become part of your journey? Because you have a writing credit on Censor. Where did that start for you? The idea that, oh, maybe I should try looking into writing these things too.
That's a really good question. So I wrote a short film while I was finishing uni, and I hoped to make it as my graduation film, but I didn't get to. Like, they chose, this is the whole thing with being picked as like, you get to make a film and you don't. That happened in my final year of uni. So I didn't get to graduate as a director. I actually graduated as a sound designer because I was like, I want to learn something. I love sound. And so I went off and did sound on a film. I actually came out of uni and I got a job in a sound post-production company, which was brilliant because it was like ADR and you're meeting actors and directors. But I didn't want to work in sound. I'd written this short and I made it by raising money in the pre-crowdfunding days where you have like a raffle and you write to everyone you know and ask them if they'll put money into your film, and people send you a tenner or 20 quid. Or I think I had a party and I raised funds like that and eventually put this money together and made this short film, which I went back to Wales and shot in my house where I grew up, which was a rented house and still owned by the same farmer, and was like crumbling and empty. And he was like, yeah, whatever you want, just go for it. But it was filled with rocks. So we had to empty all the rocks. Anyway, we made this short film and it was like a real labor of love. And I'd raised all this money. And then when I showed it to people, I felt like probably about 20 to 30% of people actually understood what it was really about. And I thought, maybe I'm not that good a writer. I thought maybe I need to focus more on directing. I think what I really regret in some ways is that I didn't realize that writing is a craft that you learn. It's not something you're just like, bang, you're born with that. And I'd never had any training in writing whatsoever, So I went out and started to look for writers to work with, and that was how I made a lot of my shorts. I worked a lot with Anthony Fletcher, who I co-wrote Censor with. But in a way, it was almost a blessing at the same time, because as I wasn't writing stuff, I was able to just go out and shoot and shoot and shoot. And I was writing my music video ideas. I was kind of throwing ideas together and sending it over to Anthony as like this is my idea and this is the mood board, this is the world, this is what I want to explore, and like throwing those scripts backwards and forwards between us. But I wasn't like in the guts of the writing process. And then it wasn't until like later in the shorts and moving into Censor that I was encouraged to co-write, basically. And in a way, like Censor was my big learning to write experience. And now I love writing, and I think I'm okay at it.
That's great. Well, it turned out great the first time. So, I mean, that's great. That's so cool. If you're a filmmaker, you have this idea, and then all of a sudden it becomes viable. Like, wait a second, maybe I actually could do that. So, like, I'm always very curious to know where that started, because that transition from like spark idea could be a thing to wait a second, I could actually put my hands on a camera and make that.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking for feature ideas. You know, you're always kind of thinking, well, I want to make that step, and what's it going to be? So you'd write down little ideas, and is that a feature film? Is it enough? Is it a short film? And Censor as an idea came to me from reading an article about the Hammer horror era, where the article talked about how censors looked at Hammer horror films, and that there was this one rule. They didn't have many rules, but one of the rules was that blood on the breast would make men likely to commit rape. So any image of blood on the breast of a woman would be cut. And I thought, well, surely a lot of these censors were men. So what protected them from losing control if they saw that image? And I started to think about this kind of silly idea about like a guy working as a censor who starts to think maybe he's being affected by the films he's watching. And through that, I started to look at censorship through the ages, and I landed in the video nasty era. And these are kind of films that I grew up watching. You know, I was obsessed with The Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Suspiria. Like, they were the ones I could get my hands on anyway. And I kind of dove into this world of crazy history in the UK, where basically people thought that horror films, VHS horror, which they termed video nasties, was going to turn society into monsters. And I thought, isn't this kind of what I want to look at in the character? I want to look at somebody who's questioning their moral boundaries, they're questioning whether they're a good person. And that's what people were afraid of during that period. So I was like, this is really interesting. That was in 2012, I had the very first seed of that idea. That was when I read that article. And I, through that, then met Anthony Fletcher, who became my co-writer. And I met him to say, I want to make this feature film, but I kept getting these opportunities to make shorts. And I knew I felt at that point that I wasn't ready to make a feature. That was what I felt. Whether I was or I wasn't, I don't know. So I was making these shorts. And again, the feature kind of writing gets put on the back burner, because you're like, oh, I've got this opportunity to make a short for this production company, and there's a budget, and I'll do that, or I'll do this music video, and the feature keeps getting pushed back. Then one of these short film funds opened up that I mentioned, that was like a BFI short film. And I thought, well, maybe I could make a short film that was set in the same universe as Censor, but it wasn't the same story. And that would be an interesting kind of leaping off point for the feature film. So I could apply to this BFI fund, they'll give me the money, then they'll want to make the feature. That was like my equation I'd worked out in my head. And I'd been going through all this research about the video nasty era, and a big thing was like how these films affected kids. And so I thought, well, I could look at a child who discovers video nasties and, you know, what happens to them. And so that was how the short film Nasty was born. We applied for funding from the BFI and we didn't get it. So we crowdfunded, and I managed to like work my ass off and put some money in myself. And we made that, and it went really well, like really proud of the short. And it went to like hundreds of festivals, won lots of awards, and it became a way for me to talk about the feature in another way. It's something tangible. You're not just describing this like invisible idea in your head that the person in front of you just maybe can't tune into. You've got a short film and you can say, this has been to festivals, it's been successful, it's found an audience, people like it, etc. So it was a really good way for me to talk about the feature, but also I was able to try out lots of ideas, whether that was narrative, story ideas. So the idea of searching for a missing family member came from the short. And I was like, that worked really nicely as that thread into the video nasty world. So I used that in the feature as well, but also technical ideas, like how am I going to create this kind of authentic VHS scuzzy effect? Like, I didn't want it to look like a crappy digital effect. I wanted it to feel real. So I was like begging and borrowing. I'd go to big VFX companies. Like, I worked with Framestore on the short film, and they were like, okay, we'll lend you some of our junior effects people to do this while they're not on these massive commercials or working on Gravity or whatever. So you're kind of going around and trying to get people to help you to keep the costs affordable. That was kind of a springboard, I guess, into Censor, both creatively and in talking about it and getting it out there into the world.
Yeah, being able to have something to show to really start. It's like it's almost like having your own IP that you created. You can just hand it to somebody and say, "See, I did this, and this is kind of this is in the world of it, and this is sort of where we're at. And look, other people like it. Let's make a movie."
Yeah, totally, totally. And I will say, the BFI did fund the feature along with Film Forum and Film Wales, so I got there in the end.
It finally happened, but it's nice to know though that all those rejections, did not stop you from pushing forward. And I think a lot of people are stopped by that. Festival rejections, screenplay contest rejections. You're emailing, you're querying managers and agents, and you're trying to get a meeting, and it's so hard to get those first few yeses. You have to hear so many no's to get those first few yeses, but you kept going, and now you're making Censor. So your mother was an actress, your father was an artist. Art has been around you. And so I imagine you probably didn't step into this thinking like, all right, this is going to be easy. Like, you knew this was going to be a challenge, I'm sure. And so how did you prepare yourself for taking on this massive thing that was going to consume probably your creative life for a while?
When I was writing the script with Anthony, I was quite insular in my life. Like, I was very focused and healthy and like, in some ways, like, I think realizing as you get closer to making the film, that was probably quite good preparation. Like, people would say to me, oh, make sure you eat well, make sure you keep healthy. And I didn't realize how tiring it would be until I actually went through it.
Good shoes, comfortable shoes every day. Otherwise, you'll want to jump off a cliff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I spoke, like you probably did then, I spoke to a lot of filmmakers who had done the feature journey already, whether that was that they'd made 4 or 1. I wanted to kind of go in knowing as much as possible about what might not work, what I needed to be ready for, where I might lose time, all of those kinds of things. So maybe you've got an idea of how you want to shoot something, and then you get in the space and you realize, oh, actually, I can't shoot it like that. But because I've done my prep, I can quickly rethink this and work out another way that works. But if I hadn't done my prep, I'd be at square one as I walk through that door. So I've always been really focused on knowing what I'm trying to get out of a scene and how I want something to look and feel. And I guess in some ways I was already working on that in the script. Like, I'll tend to think about sound a lot in the script and imagery, and you're layering that stuff in. But then I thought, well, how do you shot list and break down a feature? I've only ever done it for like max 15 pages, and now I have 90 pages to break down. And I took an idea that I sort of formed off the Godfather notebook. So Francis Ford Coppola, basically, he took the Godfather as a book and he broke down every chapter in the book by 5 topics, and I can never remember all of them, but it was something like theme, images, pitfalls, and a couple of others. And I was like, okay, maybe I could do this with my script. I take my script and I look at like theme, images, pitfalls, etc., and I'll go to the next one. And I started thinking about it like that, but then I was like, this doesn't really work. I'm very visual. So I decided to do my own version of that in a way. I took a PowerPoint document, and in that PowerPoint document, I basically layered in like all my images for that scene, sound references, Maybe it was like a link to a scene from a video nasty that I was referencing, or maybe it was like an effect that I wanted to use. And I used that as like my own way to kind of put the film together on paper. And one of the Coppola ideas that really helped me thinking about these scenes was pitfalls. And what he means by that is basically, where could the film go wrong through this scene? So what could I get wrong that might jeopardize the following scenes? And that was super useful because I started to go, well, what's the most important thing about this scene? Is it that we emotionally connect with the main character, or is it that we have a piece of information, or what's the purpose of this scene? And I'd break that down. And so it meant when I was going in to shoot a scene, I knew that was my focus. And if I didn't quite get that right, it might, the next few scenes might not work, or the rest of the story might not work. And I did this for the whole film, and I ended up with 3 gigantic PowerPoint documents that I showed my producers, and they were like, this is amazing, let's share it with everyone. For me to just sit there and like play the film out and go back to that if I needed to. And I never went back to that on set. I never actually looked at it because I was too busy. But then I did look at it after making the film when I had to do my like EPK interview. And I was like, oh, what did I even think about, what did I even think before I made this? And I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's pretty similar. Like, it was really interesting. So it was a really good way for me to break the film down. And I'd definitely do that again on the next film. But I think also it was just about me making sure I had time on my own before I got into prep, because once you're in prep, everybody wants your attention. You need to be out scouting locations. The production design team want you to be in there. You need to be casting. You need to be in meetings with your cinematographer, with your AD, etc. And I knew I needed that time before that began, where I'd gathered all my thoughts and my references, and I knew what I was talking about and what I wanted, so that I could be as efficient as possible once I got into that environment. And that was my way of doing it.
That's really unique. I've never heard of a PowerPoint presentation. That's so cool. I think that's really great. And it's so valuable too. I mean, prep is so honestly underrated. Everyone says it's important, but there's sort of like this accepted level of like, well, I did enough. I worked on it for a month or whatever. I feel like I've gotten this prep done, and let's shoot this thing. It's in my head. Let's go. But on my film, I think I was able to have the curse and blessing of the fact that we had about 3 or 4 false starts where we thought we were going to make the movie, and then it got pushed for any given reason, usually because of funds. And because of that, I was able to talk to my DP for like a year about the movie, which was really valuable, to be able to sit there and really discuss like so many things and so many ideas and really get to a point. We were drawing overhead maps of all the locations and doing the blocking diagrams. She'll walk here, he'll walk there. Camera can go here, camera can go there. How long do you think it'll take to light this part of the room? How long do you think it'll take to get 5 shots on this side of the room before we flip around?
Yeah.
Like all that knowledge was so important to me, because unlike you, I hadn't been on too many real sets. I had only really been on about 3 or 4, and 2 of them were my shorts and 2 of them were other people's movies that I was sort of like PAing on. And so like this idea of like, no, actually, dude, you're probably only going to get like a page of this in like 14 hours.
Yeah.
That blew my mind initially, that it was going to be that long, just for like this one little moment. And as soon as I settled into the idea that it takes that long to make a movie well, I was like, okay, so let's figure out what the shots are, how many we can actually do. And you're so right. Prep is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, totally. And I've always had this thing of like, you want to have those moments on set where you discover something. Like, I've always had this conflict in myself between being really prepared, knowing exactly what I want, but still going in with an open mind as to what you might discover. And so that's always something I'm kind of trying to leave a little gap for. But like I said, if you're not prepared, then that's when things can start to crumble. And also what you're saying about your DP as well, because I lived with my DP while I was writing Censor. She was out shooting features, so she was coming back and I was like, how did it go? It meant I could be like, hey, so let's watch this film tonight. And secretly it's research, but I'm convincing her that we're just hanging out. But yeah, we were like talking about the project for a long time. And the same thing with my costume designer and my sound designer, who I involve really early in the process. And I like to get my team members, my collaborators, to meet each other if they're going to be working together. So once I'd got my sound designer and my editor on board, we talked about workflows and more exciting things like, you know, sound libraries that might help in the edit. So my sound designer went away and he actually created like he sound designed a bunch of fake video nasties that he recorded and made music for, and they all had different names. And we had that as a library in the edit, so we could like pull that in and put that on if they were watching a video nasty. And the same thing once my composer came on board, which was during post, I introduced her to my sound designer, because how are they going to be working together, and what's music, what's sound design, and is there a way for us to kind of blur the boundaries of what's music and sound and share noises. And that's all super fun. And you know, when you're sitting there having those meetings, that you're never going to have time for all the brilliant ideas that you come up with. And you're like, which ones are going to get thrown out? But you hope that the right ones stick and that you manage to actually make them happen. And so there were lots of things that I came away from it thinking about what I wanted to do next. I was like, I want to shoot a film in one location with 3 actors. Obviously, I'm not writing any scripts that are like that, but I think it's all relative in that sense. So it was tough, and we shot on film. We shot on 35, which is...
It looks so beautiful. It looks
you.
amazing. I wanted to shoot my movie on film so bad. It just wasn't feasible. But yes, it looks so good.
Yeah, and I mean, that's another discipline. Like, you have to be prepared if shooting on film. You can't just roll. And so we'd be in the middle of a scene and you can hear the film burning in your cans if you're on a close-up. You can literally hear it. And then you're like, your DOP comes and whispers in your ear, like, we've used up all the film for today.
Oh,
you're thinking,
it's so
well,
stressful.
I need to shoot the scene, so I'm just going to ignore that and carry on going. And it was fine. We had the stock, but it's another layer of, do I go for another take or not? Most of the time you're running out of time anyway, so you're limited on that front. But it's another additional thing to be thinking about and planning for. And then I had a long sleep for about a week before going into the edit.
It's a strange feeling to have sort of this thing in your head, like, if I can just do the thing,
yeah,
I will be a human. I will achieve the greatness, the greatest status that I've been looking to achieve.
Exactly.
And then you do it, and you're like, okay, I did it. Huh, that's interesting. What's going on now? I'm going to sleep for a while, and then I guess I'll just do the next thing. Like, it's a cool feeling, though, to never fully be satisfied and always be hungry to do more, because that keeps you fresh. It keeps you wanting to create things that are relevant.
I think the pressure that I put on myself was huge, like way huger, because I think as a first-time feature director, there's a little bit of like, if this doesn't work, will I get to do it again? Will people trust me again with a budget? I've seen like people make their first feature and then take a really long time to make their second feature or not make another one. And so you just hope that's not going to be your story. I had a really annoying quote that I'd written in my notebook. I'd written all these quotes from directors, and I had a quote by David Fincher, which was, take all of the responsibility because you're going to get all of the blame. And I thought that would be useful, but actually it wasn't a useful thing to be thinking about when you're like, oh my God, it's all on me. But to a certain extent, it kind of is. Like, if it's a bad film, the rest of the people can walk away and go, it's the director's film, you know? If it's a good film, everybody goes, oh, this is our film, I'm so proud of it. And so you're just hoping you get to the point where you've made the film and you show it to everyone and they say, this is our film, and then you know it's okay.
I studied Fincher quite a bit. I've seen a variation of him talking about that in an interview. He talked about how if your film is great, you're going to get too much credit because a lot of people made the movie good, not just you. And if it's bad, you're going to get too much blame because it's all going to be on you if it's bad. No one knows what happened on set. You know, if there was like, if you lost a day because of the weather, or, you know, an actor got sick, or it doesn't matter. But the point is, you're right. At the end of the day, people do look at the director the most, and whether or not they were able to bring it home. When I saw Censor, for me, I think I saw it in the best possible circumstance. I don't know if this is what you would think, but I think for the type of film Censor is, which is gritty, sort of like, you know, nasty filmic, you know, experience that it is, very psychological and intense. I saw it at a local theater. It's not a chain theater. It's not updated. All of the seats are still kind of like old seats. The carpet kind of has that popcorn scent. And I had shot a short film in this theater, and so I knew the management there. And I saw it at the very last showtime, so it was like really late at night. I would say when I got out, it was like 1 a.m, so we closed out the theater. And it was the best way, I think, to watch that movie. And my friend and I went, and we loved it. We thought it was so unique, and it was unlike any of the indie horrors I was seeing at the time. And, you know, I immediately thought I have to figure out how she did this.
Thanks. That sounds like the perfect way to watch it from my side as well. I'm glad you saw it on the big screen, because releasing a film in the pandemic, knowing people are going to be watching it predominantly on their TVs, it's not the way it was intended to be seen. But then I guess when you're making a film about that era and VHS, it kind of fitted better than some films could. But I always wanted it to be seen and heard big.
Post-production, did you go through the period of thinking, I'm a failure, this isn't looking good? You know, you're seeing your first rough cut, you know, you're hearing the dialogue, it's not cleaned up, it's just this empty void sound of nothingness. It doesn't look like a real movie, it doesn't sound like a real movie, and you have to just internalize all that and know, okay, this will eventually look and sound better.
Yeah, I mean, I was absolutely terrified the first time I saw The Assembly. I went and saw it in the Film 4 cinema, so a big screen. My editor had worked on it through the shoot, and then had a little bit of time with it. And I was so terrified, like I had worked myself up massively. And that screening, I was like, okay, it's all right. Like I'd gone from like peak anxiety to it's okay. You know, we made a film, and then the really hard work then starts. And yeah, I mean, you're so tired. I think that can warp your perspective as well, because you're still kind of claiming your sanity back and energy back from the shoot, and like readapting to normal like daytime hours and things like that. So I think that definitely like skews the way you're thinking. But I think there was definitely a roller coaster along the way, and you take it and you show your execs, and then it's like, is it the film they expected it to be? Do you want really good feedback from someone that's maybe not being as glowing as you want them to be? And then you start to worry, you know, all of those things that happen along the way. And we had to do a test screening, which meant that we had to show the film to a huge audience of strangers. I think it's like 250 people. And it wasn't finished. It was really scary. And then you get all the forms that you then read through. And there's so many lovely things written on those forms. But obviously your brain kind of memorizes the negative comments.
Of course.
And so all of that stuff was definitely an emotional roller coaster. But I love post. I worked in sound, I've worked as an editor. I just feel like that is the place where you craft it. And actually, if I was to get the opportunity on future features or projects to do test screenings, even though it was horrible, I would do it, because ideas came out of that. And I think it's good to get like a bit of a litmus test at that point. So I would do that again. It was just about crafting it, and then you kind of look picture and you get into the sound, and that's just such a rich space where you can layer ideas. And I get really excited about that point, and actually bringing in the composer as well. It was like, I think going into the shoot, I always thought that it would be, maybe I thought that it would have slightly more of an 80s synthy soundtrack. I always knew I wanted it to have its own sound. I didn't want to feel like it was like a Carpenter ripoff or anything. But Emily Lebanese Farouche, who did the music, approached it in such an emotional way. She basically watched the film over and over and over again and like tuned into Enid's journey. And then she started to create music out of Enid's kind of internal feelings. She started to do stuff with her voice that was a lot to do with like being in the belly of Enid, but you couldn't tell it was a voice. And once we put that sound to picture, we were just tuned into the main character even more. And it's like those moments along the way that you kind of hold on to and just go, wow, it's coming to life in front of my eyes. But again, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how people are going to react to the film. And then we sent it to Sundance before it was finished, locked edit with a rough sound, rough color grade. And I'm thinking, oh, what if they can't see the film? And they came back within like a week and said they wanted the film. And
incredible.
That was, amazing and wonderful. And it's a funny thing, isn't it? It's like, are you the kind of person that is just like, this is amazing, my work's brilliant? I'm not like that. I'm always looking at how can I make it better? And I think directors are like that. Like, at what point do you stop making the film? You sit there and watch it with the audience for the first time and you're like, could I have trimmed a few frames off that? Or should I have you've then got to start to detach yourself from the filmmaking process and call it finished. That's difficult because we're always trying to find a way to make our work better.
And to finally be able to say that your film was in Sundance, that's just the ultimate award for getting that far and, self-generating so much of this success, on your own, just going out there trying to look for opportunities. I'm going to shoot inside this house. I'm going to go back to my old childhood home. There's rocks. We're going to move the rocks, just trying to find ways to always find cool places to shoot and finding your people, like you said, your family you're going to make movies with. This is such an inspiring story, and I really think that a lot of people are going to enjoy hearing, how you got to this point. What's next for you? What can we look forward to?
Well, now I'm writing. Obviously, that kind of prolific creation that I was doing in my short film career has obviously had to shift slightly because I'm writing a bunch of projects. I'm writing some TV and a few features, and I'm really excited about all the projects. So
great.
Yeah, just burrowing down and enjoying the bit where I get to delve into worlds and ideas and themes and characters' lives, and hopefully in the not too distant future one of those can come to life.
I would love to see it, and I hope it's on the big screen or on the TV screen, whatever. I'm going to be there. I'm a fan. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking to us about your journey. It was really inspiring to hear.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.